Over the last 3 years, you have been subjected to the most massive, harmonized, globally coordinated propaganda campaign in the history of the Western world, full stop. With this campaign, the governments of many Western nation states have turned, okay, this is key, military-grade psychological operations strategies, tactics, technologies, and capabilities developed for modern military combat against their own citizens. These are inconvenient facts. The world that many of us believed existed no longer exists if it ever did. Welcome to fifth-generation warfare. The battlefield is your mind.
Well, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, the government is either at your feet or at your throat. And in some cases, they're in your head. We're talking about weapons of mass control. And we all know that the government is all about controlling us, even though it appears we have less and less control of the government. Joining us today to tell us about weapons of mass control is Dr. John Hall. He's an MD, an anesthesiologist from San Antonio, and he has an amazing story to tell. Welcome, Dr. Hall. Tell us how you got into this, because you're an anesthesiologist, so tell us how you got into people coming to you about voices in their head. Because this has been an open secret for some time. It's something that's not talked about very much, although we do have articles here from the Washington Post. We've got articles from Wired Magazine. They've been talking about this here and then in articles since the early 2000s. So you can find some articles going back earlier than that even. And we've got pretty much every branch of the military has got their own little projects, as well as commercial applications.
Oh yeah, mind control technology is one of the most common crimes, at least vocalized or complained about on the internet today. It seems to be getting the least amount of coverage in the major media.
Wow.
There's no way to prove the electromagnetic technology, but we could prove the stalking, and we could prove the sexual assault. And we're told by the police that, well, the guy doing this to you is former FBI, he's a private investigator, he stalks people for a living, that's what he does. And she had no memory.
Sexually assaults people for a living, that's what he does.
And she has no memory of the sexual assaults due to the Rohypnol, at least not good enough memory to bring a case. And it's like the police told us, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
Yeah, it's also who you know.
And who you know. So the next best thing, I thought, you know what, I need to write all this down in a book. Of course, the names have slightly been changed since we couldn't bring any of them to prison. Once the book came out, then I saw that I was immediately inundated with thousands of other people voicing the same complaints of organized stalking, of directed energy weapons attacks, burning, twitching, severe headaches, blurred vision, as well as hearing the voices of their perpetrators in their head or in their surroundings while they're being attacked.
Wow. Well, let me go down the list of some of these that I came up with. We've got DARPA has the sonic projector that was reported on in 2007, but of course it had been around for quite some time before then. Army has something they call voice to skull. We've got the Air Force using microwaves to create sounds at Brooks Air Force Base. We've got the Marine Corps with their Medusa project. We've got the State Department, as reported by the Washington Post in 2005, working on voices implanted in people's heads. We've got a couple of companies, one that has patented something called hypersound. That's American Technologies. Has also got Holosonic Research Labs, also has a patented version. So the military-industrial complex has been all over this. When you see something this wide, this is not just one little research project from one organization. And this is something that 5, 10, years ago, it was being reported on in even mainstream press like the Washington Post, and yet nobody knows about this.
Well, the people who follow the internet pretty closely, and certainly the victims of this technology, know about it. But you're right, there's been a lot of research done into how to put voices into one's head. It was found long ago that if you can put a voice into someone's head, you can do several things. If I put a voice that's foreign to your normal thought pattern in your head, that becomes harassment. And the harassment over time will make you display signs of schizophrenia. When you go and tell people that you're hearing voices, we've been patterned to turnkey see that as schizophrenia and not even look to see if there's a legitimate source for it. If I put a voice in your head that's in your voice, and if you pattern a thought, like I tell some of these victims, when you read a book, you're actually hearing your own voice in your head as you read. If I put that voice in your head, then that becomes a thought. Wow. And you'll act on those thoughts, and that's how they think that some of this is being used for subliminal control.
Wow. I know that in some of these articles I was reading on the mid-2000s, they were talking about how they were using it as the voice of God, as the voice of Allah, because they figured that it was something that they could use. They thought that the people that they were going against that were Muslims were very religious, superstitious. And
that was used in the field of battle. The voice of God weapon, which is actually called S-Quad, or silent sound spread spectrum, was used in the first Operation Desert Storm. That was one of those scenarios where 1,500 Iraqi soldiers disassembled their weapons, got to their knees, and surrendered to 150 Marines who didn't have enough slip ties to tie them all together, because, and this was admitted, that they used S-Quad to put the voice of Allah in their heads to tell them to surrender.
Wow.
Before that, in the mid to late 80s, 5 separate inmates from the Utah State Prison had written affidavits saying that they were put in solitary confinement and were experimented on with some type of electronic device that put voices in their head, and all of them claimed that they could tell the voices of the people doing the experimentation on them were responding back to their thoughts.
Wow.
So this has been going on for a while. Unfortunately, it's just not gotten any major media coverage until recently.
It's just the new level of science that affords us the ability to communicate at any distance instantaneously.
I've heard about this. I've tried to dig into it, and it's hard to understand.
It is hard to understand. It would be my best way to put it is that when electricity first came out, it was very hard for a lot of people to understand what Nikola Tesla was getting at. But everyone was using it before they even understood it. And this is just where we are right now. It's just a new technology, it's a new conversation. People don't have to understand it yet, they just have to realize it's real.
What other kind of things can this?
Oh boy. Voice to skull technology. This is also in the foray of directed energy weapons.
What is that?
The ability to, let's just say, throw your voice into your head, or my voice into my head, or allowing algorithms that now they can blanket a whole geographical area and they can make everybody change their thoughts. They can, I use the term intrusive thoughts. Back to that fork in the road analogy. If you find yourself where you have to make a decision about something, next thing you know, you catch yourself kind of having an argument in your head with your own voices. Well, the ability to add another one of your voices in there, but have it controlled by somebody else's microphone, so to say, is a very powerful tool. And I think this is a weapon of war that we are seeing happen to everyone around us. The Department of Defense recently started initiating protocols for their employees, their agents, to discuss Havana syndrome-like symptoms. And on that list is that their agents are hearing voices in their head. And this is what they're getting at. This is that technology that, you know, next thing you know, you're trying to make a decision, but there's another Sean in your head that now is actually somebody else's control. And through the manipulation of that voice, they can now push you, just like we have, you know, the cell phones are weaponized now, the social media platforms, and they can engage with an algorithm, and they know that they can push you in a direction by repetitive information being displayed in front of you, similar to the tachistoscope in grammar school, that they can learn your system and they can learn to manipulate it on a personalized level. by just assessing you, what the things are that you're interested in, what are your weak points, what's the crack in the dam, what's the angle of attack. And it's through repetition and access. These are simply electromagnetic impulses in your head. It's not that they can't be read, it's not that they can't be copied, and it's not that they can't be just replayed with somebody else's control. I mean, I could get a voice changing thing and I could sound like you if I wanted to. I could call you on the phone, I could call your loved ones, and I could pretend I'm Sean. And they can do that for you in your own head.
So they're basically setting themselves up as the ventriloquists, and we're the dummies or the zombies, right?
Well, it's like I've said in with other reporters and other shows, that guns and taxes won't control everybody.
Yeah.
Electromagnetic technology will.
Wow, wow. And we know that too. I mean, I've said for the longest time that the IRS really wasn't so much about getting your money. It wasn't about revenue. It was really about controlling you. It was a way of offering you carrots and sticks. And of course, they're only collecting enough to pay the interest to the Federal Reserve. They were created at the same time. But this is something. So we all know that the government is into controlling us, right? And whatever they can use. And they've had very, very simple ways to control us in the past. I mean, they've got the media, they've got schools, they've got the income tax system. Everything that the government is doing is targeted towards controlling us. So of course they're going to have every branch of government working on this type of thing, because that gives them very precise control over what we're doing.
Well, and with the new revelations coming out about the NSA, 10 years ago when I first started writing about some of this and getting into this type of science, it did seem sci-fi and it did seem far-fetched to a lot of people, especially a lot of people thought the brain was too complex to manipulate that way. Since some of Snowden's leaked records about the NSA, most of us already knew that the NSA was listening to our phone calls.
And we were accused of being paranoid.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Accused
so
of
now we're accused of being schizophrenic if we hear voices, but we know that there's some reality of that.
But it's not too far of a stretch if they have computers big enough to collect all the data on our text, on our cell, and on our emails. And then it came to light that they admitted that several NSA agents were using NSA technology to target love interest. And it was happening so frequently that instead of HUMINT for humans intelligence or SIGINT for signals intelligence, that they actually have one that they refer to as LoveInt. And these were agents that were actually targeting either girls they saw or met that wanted to watch them, or ex-spouses or current spouses with NSA technology. And it's happening frequent enough that it's called LoveInt.
Well, it's always like any technology. It could be used for good or it could be used for evil. I don't know if there's any good use for putting voices in people's heads, but certainly what this reveals is the dark side of people that are involved in this. And we've seen this in the past. We've seen people very high up in the NSA, like Michael Aquino, who was a Satanist, who founded the Temple of Set. So we know that there's some very dark, I would even say Dr. Strangelove type of characters who are involved in this. So it's really not surprising that that would happen. But we've had some revelations about connections to this, possibly with the recent Navy Yard shooting. Tell us about that. What was meant by my ELF weapon? And he's also going to go into a lot more detail about how people all over the country are being harassed electronically.
When I first saw the Navy Yard shooting, putting that in conjunction with the last two mass shootings that we've had as well, the Sandy Hook shooting and the Colorado shooting, most of us that are working in this technology were already a little bit suspicious that maybe there was some control issues going on. We know that our current administration desperately wants gun control. As a matter of fact, if you notice the early stories coming out immediately after the Navy Yard shooting, all of the pundits were saying it was an AR-15. They immediately jumped on the fact that this was an AR-15. Well, it wasn't an AR-15 at all. It was a shotgun and a handgun.
And he even led up to it the day before. Obama went on Stephanopoulos' Sunday talk show and talked about how 80–90% of the people wanted gun control. It's not true.
Yeah,
80–90% of the people are against him on Syria. Yeah. They're not with him on gun control.
No, not at all. So when I saw this, putting it into the rest of the context that they need these mass shootings in order to pass their gun control agenda, I'm already a little bit suspicious. Well, then when I saw that he had complained to the police, and he tried to seek out help, he went to the police and said that he had had an altercation in the airport, that he felt like he was followed, and that there were people putting voices in his head and vibrations into the room at his hotel meant to sleep deprive him, which incidentally, most of the victims of this technology that I work with all suffer from sleep deprivation
Really?
by that very same means. Then I knew we were onto something, that this guy probably was being victimized himself before he went and did the shooting. When I saw that he had etched into the side of his shotgun, "This is my elf weapon," that pretty much told me, and this guy worked in the field. You know,
He's not talking about Legolas. What's the connection with elf?
Extremely low frequency waves. And extremely low frequency waves are very easily used to manipulate the human brain. The human brain is very responsive to elf waves. As a matter of fact, HAARP generates elf waves by heating up the ionosphere and bouncing elf waves back to the planet.
And the elf waves are used to communicate with submarines. So that would be one connection with the Navy Yard.
Out of Michigan and Wisconsin, 56 miles of antennas there to communicate under the sea with submarines with elf waves. They're unshieldable for the most part. They travel through the Earth. They've also noticed that during seismic events where the Earth releases an abundance of its own elf waves, that you typically see more UFO sightings around those areas, and they think that it's an effect from the elf waves on human beings' temporal lobes of the brain, that might be done. Michael Persinger at Laurentian did a lot of research with elf waves, showed that you could stimulate the temporal lobes of the brain with elf and microwave and give people a sentinel being effect where you felt like someone was in a room with you. He even was able to simulate alien abduction using that. So we know the brain is very sensitive to them. That in conjunction with putting voices in somebody's head, I don't think he went to that Navy Yard being subliminally controlled by this technology to do this. They may have been attempting to subliminally control him to shoot someplace else, but by etching that in the side of his weapon, I think he went to the area where he thought the source of the voices was coming from, as more as a protective effort or a vengeance effort, not a controlled effort.
Right, right. So if he did some research, found out that ELF is being used to put voices in your head, and he saw that even if that wasn't what they were doing at the Navy Yard, he saw they had a big elf thing. That's a very interesting connection.
Are we ready for a new world order?
And now's the time when things are shifting. There's gonna be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. We've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it.
We are the people of the light. They are the people of darkness, and light shall triumph over darkness.
This whole conspiracy to enslave humanity is a psychological game. You're not going to sell a tyranny by telling people it's a tyranny.
They are building false realities into which they want to induct you so they can play God.